I guess my first introduction to horror was the Stephen King movies, like Christine. And then the fascination grew. I actually took a horror film course in college at UCLA. And I just learned a lot about the genre and found it fascinating, and just the psychological aspects of why we're attracted to horror, and concepts like the final girl, which I actually was thrilled that I got to be the final girl in Valentine. If you're not a horror geek, I'm sorry, you might not know what the final girl is. Yeah, so I think I appreciate more psychological horror and more thrillers than straight up gore. When you're first starting out, you're canvassing and you're just excited to get a job, period. You know, you're not as picky and choosy in terms of, oh, I'm only going to do this genre, and you know. But again, for me, I had always been a fan as an audience of horror. It was always Kate that they were interested in me for. David Boreanaz and I had the same agent, so I think she sort of brought it to my attention because David was already attached. And I remember doing a chemistry read with David at Warner Brothers in one of the little bungalows, and I just remember we actually did the scene, which is sort of the Mexican standoff scene at the end of the movie where I'm faking him out that I believe him, and then right before I knee him in the balls. So it's that tense, dramatic moment before I knee him in the balls and run. So, and I remember that was the audition scene, and it was with David. And David is a pal. We still are in touch to this day, and he's good friends with my husband. And we actually made another movie together a few years ago. And I just remember thinking, he's such a jokester, and he has this effortless charm, and he's so buoyant and just really funny.
Not gonna hurt you, I'm just gonna bash your head.
So, if anything, it was hard to keep a straight face. Even though he's playing this troubled soul, like he just has this very easy, smooth, effortless charm, which I think works really well for the movie. As an actor, especially getting to be the final girl, which is basically the last girl standing, right? You get to kind of be the audience's way in, right? You are kind of their link to the world, and you get to, most of the time, and in Valentine, you get to have that final showdown where you stand up to whatever menacing force is attacking you. And so I think it's empowering as a young woman, and there's more range emotionally because you're in these extreme situations. So as a young actor, I think it's appealing that you get to play extreme emotions, terror and despair and fear and all the stuff that goes into making good suspense. It was a very encapsulated time in terms of the sort of slick, glossy, almost, it was a Warner Brothers movie, so it was kind of elevating the genre in terms of being more commercial. And it also probed really fun issues about dating and identity as a young woman. And I think it turned on its ear the whole objectifying of the woman, because in Valentine, the men are the ones who are objectified, and the women sort of end up conquering the scene. So all of that was, and it's just a very, when I looked back and watched it recently, I realized how very 90s it was. Like, it just, the look of it, our hair and makeup and wardrobe, and it was pre-internet. So that also was a very specific time in recent history, not so recent history, where we didn't have social media. We didn't have this all-seeing eye called the internet. And, there's that really funny speed dating scene in the movie. And I was like, oh my gosh, people actually did that. It was before internet dating. And speed dating, it lasted probably for 15 minutes before, internet dating came along. But what a funny concept, right? And so there's things like that about the movie stylistically that are just so specific to that era. And it's fun to look back and remember what was going on then. We did have a little bit of a rehearsal process once we got up to Vancouver where we shot. I look back at that character, and it's sort of interesting because it was sort of paralleling where I was at a little bit in my own life of just an emerging woman, like going, making that transition from girl to woman. And that was sort of what Kate was going through, and being a young professional, and but still there was just such an innocence to her, and a guilelessness, and a willingness to believe. I look back and I'm like, oh my God, my voice was so delicate and sweet. I'm like, who is that creature? Like, I can't believe that's me. But I referenced Mia Farrow from Rosemary's Baby, so there is that sort of wide-eyed, almost ethereal innocence. Even though she's grounded and she was a professional and all this stuff, but like she kind of, compared to the other characters that she was surrounded by, took things at face value, right? And suspended judgment. She was like a non-judgmental person to her detriment.
I know Adam. Okay, fine, he's no angel, but he's not a murderer.
There's always the temptation to go into that victim mentality. And so I looked at Kate more as someone who just suspended judgment, right? She just was willing to give everyone the benefit of the doubt. Even Dorothy and, friends of hers, she never judged Paige. She just kind of appreciated her friends and her boyfriend and really wanted to see the best of them.
By the time you watch this, Jamie, Featurette, you need to sing us very much.
Right now I'm here.
Send me my love to you right now, wherever you are.
We all want to be in the sequel, even the dead ones. We can come back to life. I could be Paige's equal.
If the price is right.
Oh, Jamie is so lovely. He has a very easy rapport, and that cute Australian accent, which makes you just do what he says. No, he kept a very fun-filled, joyful atmosphere. It's interesting when I'm sure you've heard this before, but a lot of times when you're doing darker material like horror films, the atmosphere on set is actually very jovial. There's a lot of joking around and shooting the breeze, and it was a pleasure to go to work. It wasn't a tense atmosphere at all, and it's fun. I mean, it's you're playing chase, you're hitting people over with a bottle, you're wielding a gun, it's just. I think, again, the extremism of the horror genre, there's just a lot of room to have fun and not take yourself so seriously. It's very easy to kind of flip the switch. I could be joking with David literally right before they yelled action, and then, because you're in that playful mode already, and you can switch that gear easily. There was a lot of camaraderie amongst the girls. We were on location. So anytime you're on location, there's a sort of a built-in atmosphere of summer camp, and we were all excited to be working and doing this fun movie together. And I think even the minute you get on the airplane together, you form this immediate bond. And again, we shot in the summertime, and it was just a very happy memory. And we knew each other. I knew Jessica Capshaw a little bit before, so it was fun to get to hang out with her, and Denise, and yeah, it was like what you saw. That bond was definitely there. Who would have thunk, right, that sexual harassment scene would have such implications to what we've been seeing, recently? Yes, again, I think this movie, for what it's worth, had all sorts of kind of ideas and concepts that were ahead of its time. Couple funny memories. I remember the scene just prior to the speed dating scene where Denise and I are walking towards, the restaurant bar. I remember they had given me this scarf to wear that was some sort of synthetic wool, or I don't know what it was, but I broke out in hives. And I remember we'd already established the scarf, so I had to act my way. I was like, please God, let's finish this scene, because I was like just, red, blotchy, in so much pain, burning. You just never know what obstacles you're gonna have when you're shooting a scene. Another interesting, fun factoid is that Valentine was one of my first big paychecks, and I I'm very grateful because I used that money to put a down payment on my house, which I'm still living in to this day. So thank you, Valentine. I do remember that night, yep. I remember I went with my husband and a bunch of friends, and it was great to be reunited with the cast. And I remember the Maxim tie-in, yep. That was I think the actual premiere was at The Man's Chinese, yep. I think anytime you watch yourself for the first time, at least for me, I have to watch things at least twice, because the first time you're so sort of shocked. It's so unnatural to see yourself, especially on the big screen. So you get distracted by things that don't really matter. So I was probably a little bit like shell-shocked. And then the second time you see it, you can actually really enjoy the film and really look at the performance and everything else. I think it was the farthest thing from my mind when we set about making this movie. You don't think that it's going to go into a classics column in terms of, horror of that generation. But it is interesting, when people come up to you on the street and they reference these movies, you're like, wow, it has a life. It's interesting.
Damn it!
It also has a degree of camp, so it's one of those movies that you can talk back at the screen and say, oh my gosh, don't do that. Oh my gosh, she didn't say that, don't go in there. So that might be why. And again, a celebration of a very specific, different era than we're in now. It was a step in the right direction in terms of this female empowerment movement, which has really gained so much momentum. Again, a little bit ahead of its time. But a strong, a bold step in that direction for that time. And I think it's just a really interesting look of how people socialized right before the internet. We kind of just assume now that the internet's always been there, and yet it wasn't. And people had to, get around that. They had to actually talk to each other. It's a wonderful thing to have your work encapsulated so that you can actually look back and reference and see where you were at 20 years ago. And it's an incredible look back, and then you get to also see how you've evolved and changed and what's the same. And I think that's such a privilege with my profession that you get to do that.